Hi, and good evening, and welcome back to Chapter 4 of Singer on the Sand. Last week we ended our story with Tama and Chief Meriton sending for the Islam teachers to come. And so this chapter is called Marta. The witch doctor and Chief Meriton sat in the hut where Tama lived. It was evening of the day after Tama returned to his village, tired and hungry and full of anger because of the new magic the big teacher had brought to the island of Great Sangir. The two men sat and talked about what could be done to rid the village of the teacher's family. Over and over they came back to Tama's suggestion that the only plan that held any promise was to bring Islam teachers from the southern islands and encourage the people to follow the customs of Islam. Now, when the new teachers come, Tama advised the chief, you must give them the good garden land right behind the teacher's house. You know how it slopes up the hill there, but it's not too steep and it is rich. Anything will grow there. Tama felt better than he had since he left the village on the other side of the island. His stomach was full again, and the chief agreed to his plan. I will see that the Islam teachers have a fine new house, and they can plant all sorts of vegetables and fruit trees. They will prosper because you and I will see to it that they get the best of everything. The chief's voice sounded cheerful again. I'm sure this is the best way, the only way. Little by little, the people will see that Islam is best because it will not take away from the old customs. When Chief Meriton left Tama's hut, he stood tall and strong, and the witch man knew that he would lose no time in carrying out the plans that they had made. Tama unrolled his sleeping mat and stretched out on it. He was so tired from his long walk across the island that he ached in every joint. Then it began to rain, and he thought wearily that now he must get up and move his mat because it was right under the bad place in the roof. Then he remembered. The roof had been mended. He settled back down on his mat with deep satisfaction. Now, why did the teacher mend my leaky roof? Tama asked himself. I wouldn't have done it. He remembered that the hut where he had slept on the other side of the island had a big hole in its roof, and he had never thought of mending it. Tama slept well, for he was tired, and also a big load had been lifted from his mind since the chief had agreed to his plan about the Islam teachers. The sun had already risen when he wakened the next morning, and as he went down to bathe, he saw people coming and going between the village and the teacher's house on the beach. There were two springs in the village, one in the jungle a little way back of Tama's hut, and another near the center of the village. The people used them both. But the one in the center of the village was larger, and the women gathered there to gossip and bathe, so the men often used the jungle spring. Tama always used it unless there was some special news he wanted to gather or some village problem that he knew would be talked about at the village spring. And after his bath, Tama walked down the beach to get a look at the teacher's house by daylight. The whiteness of everything astonished him. When he saw the green plants growing around the house in their trough of whitewashed stones, he drew in his breath with a sharp whistle. Then he heard a noise. He looked toward the lower beach and saw a boy with flaming red hair. This must be the teacher's son. No one had told him about this boy. The witch doctor could only stare at such bright hair and marvel at how it could have grown out of a human head. The red-haired boy was not alone. The chief's son, Satu, was with him. The two scurried off among the coral rocks, chattering and gesturing after the manner of boys who are best friends. Not a bit too soon, not a bit too soon, Tama muttered to himself as he walked back to his hut. He cooked his breakfast and threw out the soiled leaves he used for plates. Then he saw something that widened his eyes with surprise and made him lay his hand across his pounding heart. A small girl child was coming toward his open door. She wore a long pink dress that fluttered in the wind. Her shining yellow hair hung in two flat braids down her back. Her face was round and sweet, and her eyes the blue color of sky on a cloudless day. The child must belong to the big teacher, but what was she doing? She did not pause, but came right up the ladder into Tama's hut. She did not act surprised to see him. She carried a little bunch of red flowers, and she held them out to him and smiled. The child was beautiful. Tama looked at her with a feeling in his chest that was almost like an ache. He knelt on the floor and took the blossoms from her little white hand. He touched the small fingers, and they felt warm and moist. He took the little hand in his, and the child laughed and spoke words he could not understand. Then she pulled her hand away, ran for the broom made of coconut fibers, and whisked it into every corner of the room, brushing and sweeping with painstaking care. Then she went to the fireplace and lifted the cooking pot. Tama watched her from the back window as she lugged the heavy kettle to the jungle spring, scoured it with sand, and washed it clean in the flowing water. Then she carried it back up the ladder and set it upside down beside the cooking place. All the time she worked, she sang a soft little song to herself. "She's like a little bird, a small pink bird," the witchman said to himself. "She works and sings, but I'm sure her father and mother don't know that I am home. They would never let her come here if they knew." When her work was finished and the hut swept clean and every speck of ashes brushed from the clay stove, the child looked out the open door toward her own house on the beach. She started to go down the ladder, then came back and held out both hands to Tama. She smiled, and her blue eyes danced as she tried to make him understand the words of her queer language. Then she hurried down the ladder and ran along the path to the beach and home. Tama watched her until she went into the door of her own house. Then he turned back to the empty hut. The day had suddenly darkened. Was the morning rain coming so soon? He looked out the door again, but not a cloud floated across the blue heaven. The witchman sat down in his clean hut and began to store away the charms and medicines from his pack. He sorted the bundles of roots and herbs. He polished the bones and teeth. One of his clusters of slick black seeds had broken open, and he spent the middle part of the day braiding new string to hold the charms. As he worked, he thought of the little child. She was different from any child he had ever seen before. No island girl ever had such eyes and hair, but it wasn't that either. No, it wasn't her looks. After all, black hair and eyes are much more beautiful than these pale colors, but this little one was so friendly, something loving and kind spread out from her like a light or a perfume. He tried to put her out of his mind, how she had trusted him, how she had spoken to him, how she had held out her two small hands, how she had cleaned his house and his cooking place and his kettle. He looked around for the bunch of flowers she had brought and found them on one of the low benches. He filled half a coconut shell with water and put the flowers in it. Then he set the coconut shell dish in the back window and was glad to see the twigs brighten and freshen during the day. Tama knew that he must make important plans. It was not enough to call the Islam teachers. He was not enough to mark off a rich piece of garden land for them or even to build a house where they might live. No, he must think of a way to show the village people that the magic wand of the big teacher could be broken, that the teacher himself could be made to suffer because he had taught things contrary to the spirits and had angered the devils that controlled the fire mountain. He sorted over his charms and selected the three most powerful ones: a goat's skull, a huge shark's tooth, and a dried snake skin, which he had gotten from a mighty witch doctor on the big southern island. There were no such snakes on Sengir. Tama knew that everyone in the village respected his charms for the wonderful things they had done in the past. It was for him to choose now what kind of curse he would lay on them. In the secret place of his lonely hut, Tama called on all the devils of his acquaintance. He brought out the magic oil, mixed it with strong herbs, and smeared it all over his body. He rubbed it on the three charms, laying a most powerful curse on each. Now he must arrange some plan so the big teacher would touch one of the charms. then the evil magic was sure to work, and there would be sickness and accident or some terrible calamity. The evil spirit sometimes made some surprising trouble, even the witch doctor couldn't foresee, but it always worked in the direction of punishing the one for whom the curse was laid. Tama had put all his charms away when Chief Meriton appeared, and Tama invited him in. "It's all arranged," the chief said. "I will take 10 of the village men. I have chosen those who like to run to the teacher's house all the time. We are almost ready to leave now." Tama laughed. "I have not been idle, you know. I have already prepared the devil charms. Now I must think of some way to put one of them in the teacher's way so he will have to touch it. Then, well, you know, anything might happen, but it will not be good for the teacher." Chief Meriton laughed too. Both men felt as merrily a mood as Tama could remember. "It seems to me that the fire mountain is quieter today," Chief Meriton said as he went down the ladder. "Oh, those fire spirits will settle down as soon as we have taken care of this matter," Tama said. Chief Meriton hesitated on the stair-like ladder. "There is another thing," he said. "I would like to take my son Satu along with me. But if I do, you will have no chance to instruct him before the Islam teachers come. Also, if some bad thing happens to me, well, you know, it would be a great misfortune if both of us should be lost. You know our custom about chiefs." "No, you should not take the boy. I can see that he has already been snared by the magic of these people, but I will break that magic. By the time you return, I hope he will be as ready as you are to follow Islam." Still the chief hesitated on the ladder. "It is my wish that you should use kindness and patient reasoning to bring this boy back to his senses. He will not respond to anger and force." After the chief had gone, Tama decided that the best way to deal with Satu was to tell him the truth and use persuasion to separate him from the teacher and the boy Hans. Within an hour, Tama saw a fishing boat pull away from the landing. He knew that the 11 men on board were not going after fish. They had sailed for the southern island, and when they returned, they would bring the Mohammedan religion to Great Sangir. And that ends our chapter 4 about Marta. But I wanted to go over something with you. You know, it's Marta's kindness and her friendliness toward Tama that had softened his heart. And it sounds like it also softened the Chief Meriton. He only wanted patience and kindness shown to his son. So it's important that we show kindness and patience and loving friendship to others too, just like this little girl Marta did. Thank you for listening, and good night.